the reset, the great reset of Rishi Sunak and his government and his party after 13 years in office. That is a hard sell.
It is. It's obviously something that Boris Johnson did in 2019. He was able to convince the country that this was a brand new government, despite the fact that it was, I always have to count, I think the fourth.
I lose count
I lose
myself,
count too.
yeah.
It had been a while. And that worked very, very well. And sort of Brexit was seen as a reset. I think it is going to be much harder this time. Although that doesn't mean that people don't want to hear what you plan to do and how you plan to change things. But it seems to me that in the next election they will also have to talk about their record.
Yeah, and the trouble starts there, doesn't it? Because a lot of the sell has to do with undoing and repairing the damage of past governments, by which he means, well, his government, his colleagues, his party.
I think the hope that they'll probably have is, one, that people will understand that a lot of the reason that the country is facing challenges is not their fault. COVID wasn't their fault. Ukraine and energy bills wasn't their fault. They've done their best to get through this challenge. And that even though this is a Conservative administration, they are going to do things differently and more effectively than their opponents. And they're going to try very hard to paint those opponents' Labour as reckless and likely to spend too much and put up your taxes. But there's no doubt it's a really tough sell.
I mean, the incompetence of Liz Truss's short tenure in number 10 and the dishonesty of Boris Johnson's relatively short period in number 10, those hang around the Prime Minister's neck like a pair of albatrosses.
Yeah, I mean, you do feel sorry for Rishi Sunak because obviously he was very clear about his opposition to Liz Truss and what she was planning to do, and he was proved right. But at some level, that's tough. What voters feel is I'm poorer, and I'm partly poorer because of what a Conservative government did, and I'd like to try something else.
Yeah, I mean, well, who knows? None of us know the future with any certainty. Nothing is impossible, or almost nothing. Look, the Prime Minister's promising a new way of doing government, a new way of doing politics, focused on long-term good at the expense of short-term difficulty. The problem is, some people, maybe a lot of people, would argue he's doing the exact opposite. In the case of HS2, for example, he is disdaining an opportunity for long-term benefit, a long-term worthwhile investment for the sake of shaking off a short-term problem.
Well, I guess it depends what he actually announced, because we've been sort of having this speculation about HS2 for what feels like days and days and days.
Well, let's do that. Let's do that and assume it's for the bin, shall we, for the sake of this discussion?
So I think it also depends on what he does as well. So to give the defence on this, there is no doubt that a huge proportion of the public think that HS2 is staggeringly wasteful. That the cost overruns have been extraordinary, that this is money that you could much better spend. There was an interesting poll last week showing that actually people in the north would much rather that was spent on transport that goes into cities and between cities in the north than this one train line. So there's a big difference between cancelling it and doing nothing instead than cancelling it and spending it on the rail that people actually want. There is, however, a bigger challenge, which is a sense that we just vacillate and are indecisive for years and then never commit to anything. And I think that is a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, it is depressing that this country seems unable to execute a big long-term infrastructure issue like this, where other countries seem to manage it perfectly well.
It is abysmal that we seem to have 10 times the cost of equivalent countries.
Other issues, fall into the same category, arguably, like the net zero announcements. Does that look to you like an election winner? The polls, in some cases, seem to have narrowed.
So I think there are three different things here. The first is, I do think simply the Prime Minister having a bunch of announcements and showing that he has momentum is a good thing.
Just announcements, whatever they may be about.
That is sort of, if they're super unpopular, no, but just showing that he has some plan, that is a good thing. Two, I don't think that net zero is, I don't think that reducing net zero obligations is particularly popular. Even Conservative voters support action on net zero. And I think that they want to feel, as you said, that the government is committed to something and consistent on something. But
so
three,
you think it was a mistake, do you?
I would not have done net zero.
You think it's an election loser, not a winner?
I think it's not either. Very few things are election winners or losers on their own. But of all the announcements, I think actually that is the one I would definitely not have done. However, I think you have to recognise that most of this is about setting up the election campaign. And with net zero and presuming HS2, a lot of this is going to be about forcing Labour to justify their spending and their tax plans and trying to demonstrate that they can't make their sums add up more than about the individual announcements.
Yeah. And what about Rishi Sunak himself, with your strategist's hat on? Does Rishi Sunak look to you like an electoral asset?
He certainly was. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about Rishi is that people loved him during furlough. He had enormous affection. He had enormous affection from the public, and also that when he first became prime minister, people did think that he's fundamentally competent. He's competent. He has a grip on the detail. He knows what he's doing. I don't think he has yet demonstrated himself as a kind of change candidate who people feel excited about, nor do they feel very excited about Starmer. But I mean, leaving all aside, the truth is, it's been 13 years. There's a massive gulf in the polls, and it is going to take something gargantuan to convince people that they shouldn't give someone else a go.
Yeah. Well, you're not going to say it's an impossible task, but you don't sound as if you put much money on it.
It's not
Rachel.
impossible, but it is extremely hard.
I think your laugh is as eloquent as anything you may have said there, frankly. Also, is your party the party looking in some ways unleadable? I mean, you've got here in Manchester arguments, something like a revolt over tax. You've got Liz Truss still stalking the wings. Boris Johnson, he's not here, but he's in the background. Is the Tory party looking a bit unleadable now? I
mean, the truth is, and I think this is true of all political parties, that how leadable a political party is in turn dependent on how it's doing in the polls. So you'd have said Labour looked unleadable until suddenly they were really ahead, and now they want to do what Starmer wants. The same is true of the Conservative Party. If the polls start to close significantly, then the Conservative Party will fall into line.
Okay, well, we shall see when and if that happens. Look, you wrote the manifesto last time around, or you helped to write the manifesto last time around. If you were writing the next one,
oh God, I don't know.
What would be your game changer?
I genuinely don't know. And I think this is what is challenging for all the parties. It's why you're not getting a lot of policy, because we are stuck in relatively low growth, a country that doesn't seem to be able to build or deliver things, and a public sector that, despite having substantially more money, has lower activity, and people feel that it's fundamentally not working. I think it is enormously difficult to convince the public right now that there's a game changer.
Well, let's say we can agree. Let's say no one could disagree with the fact that it's enormously difficult to turn the ship around from here. But Rachel, you are an ideas person.
Oh no, this is tough, John. You didn't warn me I had to come with a new manifesto.
Well, no, if you run out of ideas, there's not much hope. I mean, have you nothing in the back of your mental locker that you would like to chuck onto the table? Some idea that might do some good.
What would I do? I think that we need to return to public service reform. So we need to have a plan for the NHS and increase NHS output. That means more hospital beds, more diagnostics, getting people out of NHS beds and into social care.
But that's like saying we need apple pie if we're hungry. Well, of course, we need people out of hospital beds, in which case we need a more active social care system.
I told you, I would have more hospital beds. I would rebuild the hospitals.
Right.
I would change fiscal rules to allow more borrowing to allow us to rebuild the public sector realm. I think that's critical.
So a big hospital building program,
I would have a
which means a big commitment
of
a big commitment then of capital spending and
absolutely.
And
I would have
spending.
a 10-year capital plan.
Yeah.
I think we desperately need consistency on that. I would promise consistency. This is what would I think make a difference. I would do planning reform. I think the fact that we can't build things is very substantially because we are stuck with our planning regulation.
Shouldn't you persuade Conservative MPs about that? Because they're the main obstacle, Rachel, aren't they?
I think everyone's the main obstacle. The reason the Conservative MPs were against it is because the public tend to be against it. And the reason the public tend to be against it is because they are worried about building in their area. But I do think there are ways that you could do planning reform for infrastructure that is much more effective. To your point about HS2, it is vastly expensive, mostly because of planning regulation. And I think actually one of the most exciting things that this government's announced recently is plans for new development and growth in the Cambridge area, because that says this is a place where we're willing to make change. But these are all, of course, very detailed announcements. I am not convinced that any grand promise is what is going to turn the public round. I think you have to start delivering.
There's not much time to do that. I mean, in the face of your unremittingly gloomy analysis,
wow.
can you give me one reason for this party to be cheerful now?
I think that the economy is doing better. I think that people are starting to feel inflation coming down. I think there will be some wage growth, and I think that promising something is better than promising nothing, but I'm not going to pretend it is easy. It is not.